Preocupado el presidente anaranjado, viendo que las elecciones las perdió.
Solicita a los que le hacen los mandados que se apuren, pues la fiesta terminó.
Y mirando que se va a acabar el varo,
han formado un titingo. Se han negado a abandonar la Casa Blanca, a la silla del despacho se amarró. Los pelitos que le quedan los arranca, pataleando por la rabia que le dio. Y mirando a Cuba con sus batas blancas, de cabeza se tiró.
El que tenga confusión que se confunda, el que quiera claridad que venga a ver.
La jugada no es compleja ni profunda, está claro cómo quieren proceder.
Solo falta que nosotros los dejemos,
y eso no va a suceder.
Con la conga de los hoyos no te metas.
No te metas, no te metas.
Cuba viva sin que nadie la someta.
No te metas, no te metas.
Mi tierra linda, mi cubanía, mi bandera se respeta.
No te metas.
De La Habana pa' Santiago, defiende lo tuyo, cubano.
No te metas, no te metas.
que no te metas con mi tierra, que mi Cuba se respeta.
Se respeta, se respeta.
Soy el mambí que aún vive con el machete en la mano.
Se respeta, se respeta.
No, 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 no. ¿Qué me importa si comentas?
No te metas.
De donde vengo yo, estamos listos para la contienda.
No te metas.
Aguanta ahí, pero dime tú, ¿pa' qué tú inventas?
No te metas.
Con mi pueblo guarachando, yo vine aquí pa' cantar.
No te metas. No te metas.
Toda Cuba está esperando que yo la ponga a gozar.
No te metas. No te metas.
Aquí nadie tiene miedo, tú conmigo no te metas. Oh, no. ¡Hey! Oye, soquetón, mi alegría te molesta.
Porque tú me conoces bien en todas mis facetas. Que no tenemos miedo, sal de ahí, no abra esa gaveta.
We're live.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. How's it going? My name is Sheldon Tenorio, organizer with the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade, also organized with Pueblo Action Alliance. Again, my name is Sheldon Tenorio. Glad to be here. Thank you for everybody tuning in. Also, those who will be joining us across various social media platforms. Welcome, welcome. Again, we do our last Wednesday programming of each month. Today's will be a super amazing presentation by Onisanwu, covering the various ways solidarity, how Cuba has showed up in Africa. Onisanwu or Roberto, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Hey everybody, I'm Oni. Nice to meet you, or nice to see y'all again on the stream at our public meeting. I'm with the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade and the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Hello, I'm Alberto Roybal. I'm with the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade. I've been for a while now, many years. And I'm also with the Southwest Organizing Project, and very glad you could all join us. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, y'all. Again, we do these every last Wednesday of each month. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us here on Facebook. And be sure to check out the bbforcuba.com website as well. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Omisanlu for the presentation for tonight's programming. Cool. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks. So first of all, let me see if I can make myself the only visible one for now. There we go. Hi. So first of all, greetings to our ECAP comrades who I see saying hello from Havana in the comments. Shout out to y'all. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you tuning into our streams. So as Sheldon mentioned, today for our political education on Cuba at our public meeting, I am going to be doing a presentation talking about what is solidarity and answering that question using the example of how Cuba showed up for struggles for African liberation throughout the continent. So I am going to share my screen. I have some slides for y'all, but I just want to make sure that everything is good to go and I can see my notes. So 1 second. Sorry, I should have this ready. Ooh. So theoretically, hold on. Okay. So y'all can go ahead and let me know if you are able to see my screen. I don't know if it's going to work. Did that work? No, it didn't. Sorry. Technical difficulties. There we go.
Well, oh, the
There we go. It's just gonna not be full screen, I think.
awesome. While Omisanlu was putting up the presentation, you can go ahead and speak a little bit more about the BB who would like. I know Roberto has had many experiences traveling to the island. I myself got to travel on the brigade myself. There's so much to learn, and here we go.
Yes! Okay! We got it. Alright. Cool. Alright, I'm ready to go, if that's cool. Alright. So, like I mentioned, and we can have Roberta answer that question at the end, because we'll have time for any questions or comments that come up for y'all as I'm doing this presentation. But again, this is going to be a presentation, a seminar on what solidarity is, using the example of how Cuba showed up for African liberation struggles all over the world. So this presentation was originally created for the Venceremos Brigade's national call, where a lot of the organizing work happens for the brigade. But I've done it several times since, and it's really awesome because the way that Cuba shows up, not just for Africa, but for all oppressed and poor and working class people around the world, is a really powerful example of what solidarity in a revolutionary context looks like. Like capitalism teaches us to be every man for himself, to only look out for ourselves, to sort of exist in isolation and alienation. And what revolutionary solidarity is about is understanding the ways that our struggles are connected, understanding the ways when we fight side by side, when we engage in solidarity with other people's struggles, we're also fighting to liberate ourselves. So Cuba is a very powerful example of this. And it's also an opportunity to share some very little known history, because not a lot of people know about anti-colonial struggles in Africa, and they certainly don't know about Cuba's contributions. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I want to open with a quote from an African man who was on the front lines of the struggle for the liberation of the continent, specifically in Azania or South Africa. Azania is like the name that African people on that land call that land. South Africa is a colonizer name. But that man is Nelson Mandela. He was, of course, famously a leader within the African National Congress, which was an anti-colonial organization in Azania. He was also the first president of South Africa, of Azania, when the apartheid government fell. He is, for many reasons, a somewhat controversial figure, especially for like the capitulations that were made after the end of apartheid, and for the fact that, African people in Azania still don't have their land back and still are not free. So, there are a lot of very reasonable criticisms of Nelson Mandela, but the fact remains he was on the front line of the struggle for land back in Azania, of the struggle to end the apartheid system in Azania. So he had a front row seat. He was an active participant, and so he is a reliable source when it comes to understanding how Cuba showed up in that specific struggle and in Africa as a whole. So I just wanted to give some context for the quote and for Nelson Mandela as a person, and now I'll share it. So Nelson Mandela on Cuba and Africa, he says, "The Cuban people hold a special place in the hearts of the people of Africa. The Cuban internationalists have made a contribution to African independence, freedom, and justice, unparalleled for its principled and selfless character. Cubans came to our region as doctors, as teachers, soldiers, agricultural experts, but never as colonizers. They have shared the same trenches with us in the struggle against colonialism, underdevelopment, and apartheid." So once again, that is Nelson Mandela of the African National Congress, or ANC, also the first president of South Africa after apartheid fell, speaking on how Cuba showed up, not just in Azania, but throughout African liberation struggles on the continent. He's saying that they didn't come to take from Africa. They didn't come to avail themselves of resources or land or to get something in return. They came with completely altruistic intentions. They sent doctors, they sent teachers, they sent certainly soldiers, they sent agricultural experts to help teach our people how to grow food or how to repair the land after the devastation of colonialism. So Cuba came with the intention of contributing to Africa's struggle for liberation, not expecting anything in return, and not seeking to monetize that contribution. And if you know anything about the relationship that the capitalist system has to Africa, that imperialist countries have to Africa, then you know that's very, very rare. For the most part, when people come to Africa, they come with their hands open, they come to fill their pockets, but Cuba did not do that. That's what Nelson Mandela is saying. Oopsie. Okay, so in this presentation, oopsie daisy, skipping ahead. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about 4 specific examples of how Cuba showed up for anti-colonial struggles in Africa. But I want y'all to know that those 4 specific examples are but a small picture of how Cuba showed up for Africa and African people as a whole. So on this slide, I have an incomplete list. You see in the red in the bottom, it says not a full list. I have an incomplete list of where Cuba showed up for Africa and African people in our liberation. I'll just read through it. So in Angola, which we're going to talk about, in Azania, which we just talked about, in the Congo, Central Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, Harlem, New Orleans, and in parentheses it says, or they tried to, and I'll fill you in more about that in a second. But as you can see, wherever African people existed on this planet, whether it was in the African continent, whether it was in the Caribbean, whether it was in Central and South America, whether it was here in the United States, Cuba showed up to have our backs. So Cuba contributed militarily and politically to anti-colonial struggles, armed struggles against colonization in the African continent. That's why they were in Angola, that's why they were in Guinea-Bissau, that's why they're in Mozambique, for example. They showed up for anti-colonial struggles against colonialism in Grenada and in Haiti and in the Caribbean. And then here in the United States, they engaged in medical solidarity. So it says Chicago and Harlem. So Cuba used to have medical missions in the inner cities of those areas. We already know if we live in the United States, there is no nationalized healthcare here. Healthcare is basically a situation where you have to have the money to pay for it, and if you don't, then you just don't get healthcare. That's the situation for many poor and working class people, particularly African people in the United States. And so Cuban opened up these medical missions in Chicago, in Harlem, and in a few other places in the United States, and they offered free medical care to the communities that they lived in. They worked side by side with doctors in the U.S., they collaborated on medical research, but they also provided free medical care to underdeveloped communities, particularly African communities. You can tell where they are, like Harlem. So that's a way that Cuba showed up for us here in the United States. And then it says New Orleans, they tried to show up for us. The context of that is that after Hurricane Katrina flooded that city and thousands of African people were displaced and thousands also died, Cuba reached out to the Bush Jr. administration and offered support. They offered to send mobile medical facilities, doctors, waters, and also to aid in reconstruction efforts in New Orleans. The Bush administration said, no thank you. And of course, we know what happened with that. Thousands of people went on to die. Many more people were permanently displaced. New Orleans is facing rapid gentrification because after the people were cleared out by the flood, the bolsters, the investors came in. And so even though the Bush administration turned down that offer of aid from Cuba, it was not able to actually meet the needs of the people who had been devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and the consequence was that area, quite frankly, has not recovered, and the people who were living there for generations no longer live there anymore, and a lot of people died. So Cuba tried to help in that situation. The United States said no. And again, this is not a complete list. It's not a complete list. There are many, many more cases all over the world where Cuba has showed up for African liberation. I would be too long a slide and too many names to read, but I encourage folks to look into other examples and find out how extensively Cuba has showed up for us as African people. Like sometimes people say African people have no friends, and every time I hear that, I'm like, no, we have at least one friend, and that friend is Cuba. So without further ado, I'm going to go into more detail about 4 specific examples of how Cuba showed up for African liberation in Africa. So first example is Cuba in Angola. Cuba and Angola. So Angola was colonized by the Portuguese. Angola engaged in a revolutionary anti-colonial struggle to overthrow Portuguese colonialism. They started a revolutionary war. They organized the masses of people into an organization known as the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, or the MPLA. The Portuguese were backed up by NATO, which is a military alliance of European countries and the United States. So these countries provided Portugal with military support, with funding, and for political support for their attempt to put down this anti-colonial rebellion of the African people in Angola. And so the MPLA called out to the world for help. They said, like, Portugal has NATO backup. Who's our backup? Portugal called out to the world for help, and Cuba was one of the few countries that answered. When the MPLA put out that call, Cuba said, yes, we will go, and they initiated Operation Carlotta. Operation Carlotta. It was a solidarity mission with that revolutionary struggle that began in 1975 and lasted for 15 years. This was not an in-and-out kind of situation. Once the Cubans said yes, they were there for the long haul. Cuba sent more than 330,000 Cubans to serve in Angola in this solidarity mission. They sent doctors, they sent soldiers, they sent teachers. This is a recurring theme. This is what Cuba does. For many of those Cubans, more than 2,000 of them, this solidarity mission was a one-way trip. They died in the struggle for Angolan independence. They died fighting for Africa's liberation. However, some really important facts to understand about Operation Carlotta was how significant it was in the overall struggle against colonialism in Africa. Operation Carlotta unquestionably stopped the spread of apartheid in Southern Africa. And what I mean by that is that the apartheid government in South Africa didn't just intend to stay in South Africa. They had designs to institute an apartheid system across a vast region that would have encompassed like hundreds of thousands of square miles within the southwestern region of Africa. And so they engaged in a massive military campaign to attempt to destabilize the region. From 1975 to 1988, the South African settler armed forces embarked on a war of destabilization where they killed an estimated 1.5 million African people, including 825,000 children. So they were literally attempting to raise the earth to put down the resistance of African people on our own land in order to spread the apartheid system that they had built in South Africa across half of the African continent. But the Cubans came to assist the MPLA, and a decisive military confrontation with the South African settler army occurred in the southeastern Angola town of Cuito-Cuanavale. Cuito-Cuanavale was a turning point in the struggle against apartheid. The MPLA forces, combined with the Cuban forces, were able to militarily defeat the South African settler army at Cuito-Cuanavale in March of 1988. They fought for almost a year, from November 1987 to March 1988, before they forced the South African armed forces to retreat after failing to capture the city of Cuito-Cuanavale. They marched that settler army all the way back across the border to South Africa They defeated the settler government in South Africa at Cuba Carnivale, and they forced them to negotiate with anti-colonial organizations throughout Southern Africa. So these negotiations, again, made possible by the defeat of the settler army at Cuba Carnivale, directly led to the African nation of Namibia getting its independence, and of course led directly to the fall of apartheid in South Africa. So The World is an African people's newspaper in Azania, and so this is what The World said about what Cuba had done in Cuba Carnivale. The World says, Black Africa is riding the crest of a wave generated by the Cuban success in Angola. Black Africa is tasting the heady wine of the possibility of realizing the dream of total liberation. So once again, that was a quote from The World, which is an African people's owned and operated newspaper in Azania, saying that Cuba basically changed what was possible in terms of Black Africa's liberation. Cuba showed up for the struggle against Portuguese colonialism in Angola. They submitted to the leadership of the MPLA, and when it was time to face the South African apartheid settler army militarily, they helped defeat that settler army and force them to the table to negotiate with Africans fighting for their independence. So you might have noticed the name of the operation, Operation Carlotta. Carlotta is clearly a woman's name. It's actually the name of a real person. So Carlotta was an enslaved African woman who was enslaved in a sugar plantation in Cuba when Cuba was still colonized by the Spanish. Carlotta, alongside a trio of enslaved African women, led an enslaved African uprising against the Spanish plantation system in the Matanzas region of Cuba in 1843. That uprising lasted a year, from 1843 to 1844. A really cool thing about it is that Carlotta and her co-leaders were able to organize the masses of enslaved Africans in Spanish colonized Cuba using an instrument known as a talking drum. When you play a talking drum, it sounds like people speaking an African language. And so in that way, they were able to use these drums to organize and coordinate the enslaved African people for the uprising without the Spanish slave masters knowing. They used their culture as a strategy to resist colonization and to organize a militant strategy to overthrow the slave system. So Carlotta's uprising lasted for a year. Carlotta, unfortunately herself, was captured and killed. But you cannot take away her contribution to the liberation of African people in Cuba. And Cuba certainly remembered what she had done. Because when Africa was like, yo, we got to chase these colonizers off of our land, whose memory did they invoke? What answer did they invoke? This revolutionary African woman, Carlotta, who led an enslaved African uprising on their land. So here in the United States, we have statues of people like Thomas Jefferson, who raped an African woman for her whole life and bought and sold us. We have statues of people who invaded countries and toppled governments. We have statues of people that committed genocide against indigenous nations. Those are the people that have statues in the United States. But in Cuba, in Santiago de Cuba, there is not Santiago, it was somewhere in the Matanzas region, it's not Santiago. But there is a statue in Cuba of Carlotta. The United States has statues of slaveholders. Cuba has a statue of a revolutionary African woman who fought against slavery, and then when Cuba went to fight colonialism in Africa, that is the woman whose name they took. So there's a little tidbit about how Cuba showed up in Angola, which I really appreciate. Moving on, next we want to talk about how Cuba showed up for anti-colonial struggles in the Congo. And this is actually an example of where the anti-colonial struggle in the Congo actually wasn't successful. In Angola, they won the struggle against the Portuguese. They overthrew Portuguese colonialism. They gained independence. In the Congo, that didn't actually happen. So, of course, the Congo was colonized by Belgium for a very, very long time. First by King Leopold, who massacred 7 million African people in barbaric conditions while he was stealing rubber from the Congo. And then the Belgian nation, the Belgian state, took over from King Leopold, but they actually weren't really better slave masters. They were still brutalizing and underdeveloping the African people in the Congo. They were still exploiting and stealing the Congo's resources, so they weren't any better. So Belgium, of course, took over. The Congolese people, the African people in the Congo, organized an anti-colonial struggle and were able to win their independence. After they won their independence, they elected Patrice Lumumba as their first president. Patrice Lumumba famously gave a speech in front of Belgium and in front of the United States, where he said, going forward, the Congo is going to be free. We don't need y'all. All you did was take from us. We have the right to determine our own destiny. We have the right to control our own lives, and we're going to show you that we never needed you. Belgium was like, word. Belgium was very offended, and so Belgium coordinated with the United States and with the United Nations to orchestrate the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The Congo survived, 200 years of colonization. The Congo survived a man that killed more of them than Hitler killed Jews in Germany. The Congo survived this massive underdevelopment, like Congolese people were not even allowed to go to school. They survived all of this. They fought back. They organized. They raised up a leader that they wanted, Patrice Lumumba, and in response, Belgium could not let it go. The United States could not let it go. In response, they murdered this man for taking a stand for his own people. And so after the U.S. government and Belgium collaborated to murder Patrice Lumumba, that is what happened. It's on record. They admitted it. Cuba sent troops to the Congo to assist Patrice Lumumba's organization to fight back, because there was a vacuum of power created that the Belgians and the United States were hoping to seize. And so Cuba sent troops to help the National Congolese movement in an attempt to fill that power vacuum. They were waging a guerrilla war against neo-colonial forces backed by Joseph Mobutu, the traitor who helped get Patrice Lumumba killed. This contingent of Cuban troops that was sent to the Congo to assist in the power vacuum was led by none other than Che Guevara. So the picture on the slide is Che Guevara holding an African child next to, I believe that's Pombo, who is an African member of the Cuban Solidarity Mission. So it's an African from Cuba. His name is Pombo, which means leaf. So that picture is Che Guevara in the Congo on that mission. But as I mentioned, the anti-colonial struggle in the Congo, the attempt to fill that power vacuum after Patrice Lumumba was murdered, was not successful. The Cuban Solidarity Mission and the Congolese movement had a lot of difficulty working together. There were basic cultural differences, even between the Africans in the Cuban delegation and the Africans in the Congo. Language differences. The Cuban fighters did not understand the culture. They didn't understand the terrain. They had extreme difficulties coordinating on a basic level with the Congolese troops. And in addition to all of those problems with culture classes, with language classes, with not knowing the terrain and having trouble coordinating, they were also under open attack from imperialism. Belgium and the U.S. and NATO and the UN were coordinating to make sure that a neo-colonial leader would step into that power vacuum. So they were under open assault as they were trying to work through all of these problems. So all in all, the contribution or the confluence of factors creating all these contradictions and issues prevented the people's forces in the Congo from being successful. They were not able to get it together in order to fill that power vacuum, and Joseph Mobutu stepped into power and ruled the Congo for quite some time as a U.S. puppet. So ultimately, the Cuban Solidarity Mission decided to withdraw. They were like, we're not helpful here. We're not contributing to the struggle here. We're just taking up space. So the Cuban, most of that Solidarity Mission returned to Cuba. Che Guevara, however, stayed behind in Africa. He traveled to Tanzania and he stayed in the Cuban embassy there for a summer, for quite a few months. And he didn't just chill in the Cuban embassy in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam. No, he used it as a base of operations to travel throughout the African continent in order to build relationships between Cuba and other organizations and movements fighting for liberation in Africa. He understood very clearly that a part of the reason why the mission in the Congo had not been successful is because they simply did not understand enough about the people who were fighting back and about what needed to be done. So in order to correct that problem, in order to correct the lack of knowledge that led to those contradictions, he traveled to Guinea-Bissau and built with the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, or the PIGC. We're actually going to talk about in a second. He traveled to Angola and built a relationship with the MPLA. This stuff happened before what happened in Angola. It was a direct result of Che Guevara's efforts to build strong ties between Cuba and African organizations fighting for liberation. He went to Mozambique and built ties with the Mozambique Liberation Front. He went to Namibia and built ties with SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Organization. He went to Azania and built ties with the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, the Azanian People's Organization, and Steve Biko's Black Consciousness Movement. So Che Guevara was crisscrossing the African continent to build principled and deep relationships with revolutionary anti-colonial organizations in Africa. Never again would Cuba fail in a solidarity mission simply because they did not understand enough about the struggle. They were like, we need to understand what they are fighting for. We need to understand how to help them. And that is what Che Guevara did. So even though the solidarity mission in the Congo was not successful, even though after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, imperialism was able to regain a foothold in the Congo with Cuba being there, Cuba learned from that experience and took the steps necessary that next time they would be successful and next time they could actually contribute in a meaningful way to the anti-colonial struggles in Africa. That is true solidarity, y'all. Solidarity doesn't always mean that it's going to work out. Solidarity doesn't always mean that we're going to have the outcome we want. Solidarity means that even when things don't go the way we want it to, we still show up and we still learn how to do better and how to show up better for each other. That is what Cuba modeled in the Congo. And then, next, we're going to talk about the example of Guinea-Bissau. Like I mentioned, Che Guevara traveled to Guinea-Bissau and built a relationship with the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, or the PIGC. Guinea-Bissau was another long-term engagement for Cuban solidarity. Cuba provided medicine, food, and water to the PIGC for 10 years. Again, not an in-and-out situation, but like a long-haul commitment to contributing to our struggle for liberation in Guinea-Bissau. They were there from 1964 until 1974, which was the year the PIGC won independence again from the Portuguese. The Portuguese colonized a lot of Africa, quite as it's kept. And they were backed up entirely and militarily and politically and economically by the rest of Europe and by the United States. Anyway, Cuban doctors, nurses, and soldiers went to Guinea-Bissau and fought side by side with the PIGC. The PIGC understood, as all revolutionary African organizations understand, that no one is going to liberate Africa but Africans. No one is going to liberate Africa but Africans. But that does not mean that we're going to do it, that we're going to turn away all material support or political support. What it means is that we must play a leading role, a role of political, military, and economic leadership in our struggles for liberation. We have to be on the front lines. We have to be the face. We have to be the leadership. So the PIGC understood that very clearly. And so when the Cubans showed up, they were like, yes, thank you. We appreciate your support. But also, Africans must be the primary leaders of this struggle. And so that means that we're going to use you where we don't have the manpower, but everywhere else, it has to be us. It has to be us in leadership. It has to be us on the front line. Cuba was like, word, put us where you need us. So they put Cubans in places where the PIGC didn't have manpower, like in artillery units, or in places where the PIGC didn't have training. But everywhere else where the PIGC was engaged in the struggle, it was masses of African people leading, and Cuba had no problem with that whatsoever. They showed up the way that they were asked to. They showed up the way they were asked to, and that's it and that's all. So, cool fact about the revolutionary struggle against Portuguese colonialism and, quite frankly, NATO in Guinea-Bissau, they, of course, won. They won. And after Guinea-Bissau won its liberation from Portuguese colonialism, they directly led to the toppling of a fascist dictator in Portugal. They completely stripped that regime of its legitimacy. The masses of people in Portuguese were like, wait, so you're telling me that these were actually not superior to these Africans? That these Africans defeated this government militarily, and also this government is here oppressing us? If they can beat them, we can definitely beat them. And that government was overthrown. So you're welcome, Portugal. Anti-colonial struggles in Africa directly led to the fall of fascism in a European nation. So yeah, so I talked in detail about Azania, about Angola, about Congo, and about Guinea-Bissau, and now I want to talk about some principles of Cuban solidarity that we can pull from these examples. What can we learn about what solidarity looks like from how Cuba showed up in Africa? So first and foremost, Cuba always showed up as equals, not saviors. Equals, not saviors. For any African person watching the program who has been to Black Lives Matter action, who is organizing for African liberation, any poor and working class person that is engaging in organizing to fight the class struggle, y'all understand very clearly the concept of people showing up with the savior mentality. People telling us, you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it that way. People telling us, you shouldn't talk like that, you should say it this way. People telling us, you shouldn't care about that, you should care about this. People showing up basically with an attitude that they know better about what we need to do than us, like directly impacted people, us African and colonized people, us poor working class people. What Cuba understands by contrast is that the only people that can liberate and oppress people is those people themselves. No one is going to come in and swoop in and save us. That has never happened in history. Instead, what we have seen in time after time after time is that lasting liberation only comes, total liberation only comes when an oppressed people is organized to save themselves. No one can save us. We can show up in solidarity. We can accept support. But we must lead the struggle for our liberation. And the way that Cuba has showed up for African liberation shows that they understand this very clearly. Only Africans will liberate Africa. Cuba will help, but we have to lead that work. The other second principle of Cuban solidarity that I want to pull from these examples is that Cuba shows up when they are called, and they give only what's asked for, especially when it comes to criticism and thoughts on how to move. This is another concept of solidarity, another principle of solidarity that is very foreign within a capitalist and white supremacist society. Again, people show up with that savior mentality. People show up being like, I'm going to help you, even if no one even asked. People show up thinking they understand our struggles better than we do. People show up with all kinds of ulterior motives and personal motivations for helping us that have very little to do with what we are trying to achieve. So Cuba understands that people appreciate support, people appreciate solidarity, but you gotta show up when you're called, and you have to give specifically what's asked for and nothing else. And nothing else. If you think about like in your day-to-day life, if like a random person is like, you look funny or you dress funny or you did that wrong, if you like don't know them at all and they're like, hey, this is my advice about how you live your life, most of the time you're going to be offended. Most of the time you're going to be like, who the hell is this that is telling me how to live my life? Like, why do you think that I'm looking for your advice? But that tends to be how people show up in so-called solidarity in a very dysfunctional society. And what that has the impact of is that people just end up not wanting to mess with you. People end up not trusting you. People end up thinking you're judging them, and it just damages the relationship, and you need to have a deep relationship in order to be in solidarity in the first place. But if you show up when you're called, if you give what people ask for, and you only give things like criticism when you're asked directly for those criticisms, then people begin to trust you. People begin to understand that you're not there to tell them how to liberate themselves, that you're not there to tell them how to live their lives, that you're actually there to genuinely try to help them, and you understand that they know best how they could be helped. If you move in that particular way, you're going to build trust, and you're going to be able to contribute in a much deeper way than if you're throwing your weight around, throwing your so-called wisdom around. So again, show up when called, give only what's asked for, especially when it comes to criticisms and thoughts on how to move. Oh yeah, and another part of this is that for socialist countries in particular, for countries that are being attacked by imperialism in particular, people in the United States, people on the left, have this tendency to be like, oh, they did that wrong. Oh, that's their fault. Oh, they brought that on themselves. Like Cuba, for example, everybody's like constantly predicting that Cuba's about to like switch to capitalism. Any second now, Cuba's going to abandon socialism. It has not happened yet. And the reality situation is that the leftists speaking in the United States have never come close to achieving anything that Cuba has achieved. They're not coming close to building a revolution here. They're nowhere close to building socialism here. They have all these thoughts about how Cuba should move. Meanwhile, Cuba did have a revolution. Cuba did build socialism. Cuba has been resisting open attempts to destroy it for 60 years. So Cuba knows what it's doing. Why do these people in the United States think that they have the inside scoop? They know what's best for Cuba. They know where Cuba, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, why do we think that we're in a position to offer criticism that's going to be helpful when we haven't even built a revolution, y'all? Like, why? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. So, like, showing up when you're called and giving only what's asked for is also a way to, like, move in a humble way that fully recognizes that, again, oppressed peoples have to be the leaders of struggles against their oppression. You are not going to save them. You don't actually have the range. So that's Cuba. And then the last principle of Cuban solidarity that I want to uplift is that Cuba makes sure to develop a deep understanding of the struggle that they're aiding. So going back to that example of Che Guevara in the Congo, when he went to the embassy in Tanzania, when he crisscrossed the African continent, building relationships with other revolutionary African organizations, that was Che Guevara working to help build a deep understanding of all of these revolutionary anti-colonial struggles in all of these different African nations. There is no possible way, there's like no possible way that you can truly be in solidarity with someone's struggle if you don't understand what that struggle is. And it really seems like so baseless, but y'all would not believe. Y'all would not believe how often people are like, I'm here to fight side by side for your liberation, African person. And they don't know like basic things about our history. They don't know like basic things about like the strategies we tried and what worked and what didn't. They don't even know what we're fighting for in this present moment. Like some people talk to me about like equal right to vote. And I'm like, do you know what like revolutionary pan-African, like you know what I'm saying? Like people don't understand like basic things about what we're trying to do, but they're saying they're in solidarity. How can you be in solidarity with the struggle if you don't even know what the struggle is trying to do? How are you going to be in solidarity with me if you don't even understand basic things about me or the history of my people? It makes no sense. You're just going to end up doing like a bunch of random stuff saying you're helping. And then we have to waste capacity and energy directing you in the correct direction because you have not done the work to develop this understanding of our struggle. That is not how Cuba moves. Cuba works to understand the context in each place where it shows up. It is like the anti-savior mentality. It is the anti-white man's burden mentality. It is an understanding of all colonized and oppressed peoples as the agents of their own struggles. It is treating people as equals and not saviors. That is how Cuba shows up for African struggles. So those are like three core principles that I see show up time and time again in the examples that were discussed. And I also want to add, as an additional note, that even though like Cuba is racialized as white in the United States, and what I mean by that is that when people talk about Cuba, when people think about Cuba in the United States, they have a tendency to like make it a white country. But when you go there, it's immediately clear that that is not true. Cuba is an African country. Amilcar Cabral, the PIDC, straight up called Cuba an African country. Cuba has had a majority African population since slavery, y'all, for hundreds of years. Cuba's population has been over 60% African. So when Cuba shows up for Africa, it's not just about solidarity mission. It's literally members of the African diaspora in the Caribbean showing up for their homeland, for the African continent. Cuba is a majority African nation, y'all. They were showing up for themselves when they were showing up for Africa. So I just want to read this quote, which is from an article talking about Cuba's African culture. It says, as a result of 4 centuries of the cruel slave trade, almost 1,300,000 Africans came to our island, that island being Cuba. Their strong presence forever marked the history of our nation. The dark bellies of slave ships brought to Cuba men, women, and children of more than 200 ethnic groups from ancient African culture. They brought to our homeland African customs, tastes, beliefs, and traditions, forever marking the essence of our culture, contributing decisively to the formation of Cuban nationality. And then a quote from Fidel Castro that says, the fulfillment of solidarity obligations is not a virtue, it is a duty. So again, it wasn't just about being nice. It was certainly pragmatism, because the liberation of Africa liberates everybody, but it was also African people in the diaspora, hundreds of thousands of them, showing up for our motherland. That is what Cuban solidarity looked like in Africa. And I think that's the end of the presentation. It is! Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I see there's like a lot of conversation in the chat, so I'm just going to go see what's happening in there. What's going on? What's going on? Hey, Ricky. Hey, Marion. Marion watches every show that the HRP New Mexico participates in. We appreciate you. Greetings to Island from ECAP. She says, thank you so much for your support and solidarity with Cuba. Cuba and Africa have a beautiful history of solidarity and love. Recently in Cuba, we celebrated Day of Africa. African peoples are a part of our roots 100%. Greetings, Ricky. Greetings, Richard Moore. Iram, also from ECAP, says, greetings to all the good friends attending this meeting. Thanks for all you do in support of our country, driven by so much love for us. It is absolutely love for y'all, comrades. Like the way that y'all showed up for Africa, African and Indigenous and Chicano people are absolutely going to show up for you. Absolutely. Iram also says, the ECAP's North American division is in the house. Our deepest gratitude and infinite love to y'all. Solidarity with Cuba. Solidarity versus the blockade. So yeah, that was the end of the presentation. We have about like 15 more minutes. for any like questions or comments or thoughts y'all have. I'm not sure if my comrades are still on the line, but certainly welcome your comments as well.
No. Just kidding.
Help me. That's all right.
Thank you, Oni, so much. I learned so much from you every time I hear that presentation. And the others, stay tuned, everybody. Tune in. There'll be more presentations. I especially love and admire the fact of the various ways, the multiple ways in which Cuba has shown solidarity with Africa, and also is so transparent, acknowledging the fact that here's what we've done, here's what succeeded, and also here's what hasn't, and how can we do better? How can we show up better? What can we learn from this, and how can we continue forward together? I so love that. I so truly believe, wholeheartedly believe in that type of solidarity. And to just witness these examples, for me personally, is just moving and brings so much hope, especially being able to have traveled to the island and seen it with my own eyes and heard it as well and felt the love, felt the energy, the compassion, the drive, all of it across the board. So one, I'm super grateful always to be here, to learn, to hear, but also to have the opportunity as well to be in solidarity too, so it just feels good. And I hope that everybody tuning in will continue to tune in to these political educational series programs every last Wednesday of each month, and continue to learn about Cuba, continue to learn about the AAPRP, continue to learn about SWAP, PAA, and all the various organizations and community organizations in Cuba territory as well. That's a lot from me. Super hyped up, super happy. If anybody else has more to say, please do. I can't see the comments right now either, but I hope there's more.
We actually got 2 questions, but I want to know if Roberto had any thoughts. So Roberto got the deep knowledge. Hello. You're muted.
I'll talk in a few minutes toward the end.
Cool. All right. So question we got is, how does one visit and find out about you all and your organizing in Tiwa territory, so-called Albuquerque? So actually there's an opportunity to see us in person this weekend, Sunday at noon. We're having a car caravan, a Cuba Solidarity car caravan, fighting against the U.S. blockade on Cuba. So for folks that don't know, the U.S. has had an economic blockade on Cuba for 5 decades, 6 decades, for a very long time. It cost the Cuban economy billions of dollars. It has led to conditions of starvation and suffering in Cuba. It has also led to people attempting to flee Cuba, not because they don't like Cuba, but because the U.S. is fighting to make conditions unlivable in Cuba. Despite that, Cuba has successfully resisted U.S. imperialism and successfully resisted attempts at regime change, and is still resisting during the blockade. It is finding a way, but the blockade makes it really difficult for Cuba to, for example, do basic trade. Like when COVID hit and they were trying to buy ventilators, they were not able to do so. The U.S. was able to intercept the sale. They have had rolling blackouts because they're not able to get oil or gas from Venezuela. The U.S. will straight up intercept the ships, and there's no way to get oil in Cuba. It's an island. Right now, there is a campaign to donate thousands of syringes to Cuba because Cuba is not able to buy and import syringes. Cuba has developed 4 separate vaccines for COVID-19. Cuba is willing to share those vaccines with the world, while the U.S. corporations are privatizing their vaccines and making them really hard to get. Cuba's we have this vaccine, we wanted to give it to y'all, but they can't even buy syringes, y'all, because of the blockade. So we are demanding the U.S. government end that blockade. We are demanding the U.S. government end that blockade, and this Sunday, we're going to join Cuba Solidarity organizations all over the world in this car caravan demanding an end to the blockade on Cuba, demanding an end to all U.S. imposed travel restrictions on Cuba, an end to all regime change programs against Cuba, an end to the illegal U.S. military occupation of Guantanamo Bay, and we're also demanding that the Biden administration follow the move of the Obama administration and abstain from an upcoming UN vote condemning the blockade. Historically, the U.S., alongside Israel, has been one of a handful of countries that has voted against condemning the blockade at this UN vote. The Obama administration in 2016 abstained from that vote, and so there is a push to get the Biden administration to do the same thing. At the very least, abstain, do not vote in support of this bucket. So those are all the demands that we have, and the car caravan is happening this Sunday at 12 p.m. We're going to meet in the parking lot of the Walmart in San Mateo and Central. We're going to have a few speakers giving more context about why we're out there, and then we're going to cruise up and down Central Ave, y'all. It's going to be a good time. So if you're interested in learning more about the Venceremos Brigade and meeting us, please come out on Sunday at 12 p.m. at noon in the Walmart parking lot at San Mateo and Central. The best Walmart. It's always popping. It's always popping in that Walmart. So that's that. Hopefully that answered your question more. And then Kai asks, what advice do y'all have for organizing solidarity delegations to other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean? So thoughts on that question from Kai? So I will say that I've only participated in a solidarity delegation. I've never organized a solidarity delegation, but my experience in the Venceremos Brigade has taught me that it's very important to coordinate, with the people living in that country, with the people impacted, to not, again, swoop in with a savior mentality, but to swoop in with, not swoop in at all, but to go there with like a learning mentality, go there with like a humble mentality, and especially if you're traveling to a country that has been attacked by U.S. imperialism, like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Nicaragua, and like Haiti, or so many other places, understand that chances are the majority of what you know about those places is not true. Is not true. Like when I went to Cuba, I was like, damn, everything I knew was not true. And I read a lot. I read the news every day and I read books. So I'm educated on a lot of stuff. But I was like, wow, I internalized a lot of propaganda about this place. So certainly when you're organizing a solidarity delegation, my main advice would be to go there with humility. Go there to learn. Don't go there thinking you knew better than those people, that you know everything. Boop, boop. Ricky is saying, I'm hoping to tag along with Oni to Cuba soon. Yes, you come on the next brigade. Next year, please. We just shared the link to the Car Caravan Facebook event in the chat, so definitely check that out. And then Kai saying, I'm trying to tag along too, meaning to Cuba. I just keep watching the video about their trip, and I feel like I was there. That's good. That's good feedback. And then Ramiro says, great stream. Thanks, Ramiro, from Formative Anti-Conquista. Really good documentary filmmaker. Richard Moore says, end the blockade. Richard Moore of Los Jardines Institute in New Mexico. Shout out to Richard Moore. And then Kai says, that was great advice. Also looking at Cuba's principle of solidarity. Thank you for that advice. Sweet. So yeah, I don't see any more questions or comments.
Awesome. If it's cool, real briefly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Shout out Richard, Los Jardines Institute, for one. Also, thank you for those questions, everybody tuning in. I think the way I would answer it too is just understanding, like Oni was saying, you remember the presentation just now, think about those principles, think about those points, think about showing up in humility, showing up with the intention to learn, to build, create that solidarity as opposed to swooping in. And I think that goes even further as well. Me as an indigenous person, being Pueblo on Cuba territory, I definitely try my best to be able to move in a way where it's more seen as nation-to-nation building, respecting each other's territories, respecting each other's sovereignty, and understanding that, yes, even though we may be all Pueblo people, we have different structures in place as well, and understanding that if I want to go and create solidarity with a specific nation, I'm going to go and build relationships in that community and constantly see them and then return as well, not go once or twice, but constantly return, constantly build, create those conversations, and just, again, deepen those relationships. Because then for me, that's what builds solidarity. To me, that's how solidarity comes to fruition, is upon relationships, upon the intention to learn, and to go in there with an open mind and an open heart. Whether that's leaving to another country, to another place, or within Turtle Island and visiting another nation. But just wanted to be.
That's dope. Cool.
Okay, I also wanted to say that we are very thankful that you could join us this evening. Again, we're going to be here in a month on June 30th, 6 p.m. here on Facebook. And just to let you all know, the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade has a long legacy of doing Cuban solidarity work. I think the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade was formed in about 1976. We started sending people, and since 1976, we've sent hundreds and hundreds of New Mexicans to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade, and we're very proud of that legacy in building Cuban solidarity. And again, we have the car caravan this Sunday, 12 noon, on San Mateo and Central, and we'll cruise down to 8th Street and go back up. We'll have speakers, as Oni said. And you saw the chat for you can contact us at nmvenceremosbrigade@protonmail.com. And I don't know if you can let me share the screen, Oni, so I can show the leaflet.
Yes, 1 second.
Or share the leaflet yourself. But we have a bunch of small Cuban flags we'll share with you if you come to the march. We hope you join us. There's going to be thousands and thousands of people throughout the world joining us, doing their own Cuba car caravans. Like I said, worldwide. So come and join thousands and thousands of people. It's going to be really fantastic. And we weren't able to organize a Venceremos Brigade this year because of COVID. We're very hopeful we can do it for next year. And just tooting our own horn, Venceremos Brigade is one of the best ways to go to Cuba. They know the Cubans know the Venceremos Brigade very well. We've had a long relationship, like I mentioned, and we'll get to see people one-on-one, go all over the island. A wonderful, wonderful experience.
Thanks, Roberto. I agree. Changed my life. So you got.
Oni, that's an excellent presentation, Oni. Thank you so much. It was brilliant.
Thank you.
I learned a lot.
It's one of my favorites to do. It's so uplifting. So we have 4 more minutes. Are you ready to close this out, Sheldon? I don't see any more comments in the chat on the stream.
Yeah, definitely. Just again, want to express following us on social media, checking out the bbforcuba.com, also supporting the work with Solidarity with Cuba as well. All the links are in the chats. And again, tune in to every last Wednesday of each programming. Contact us through email. Also, those here in Cuba territory, come show up to the car caravan.
Nice.
For seeing everybody there.
That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Have a good evening, everybody.